All right, so section three, fairly short section, we're going to be talking about the Mediterranean and Black Seas. So we talked about the Atlantic, that very large area. We talked about the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. We talked about the Arctic up here where we are. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give us a better frame of reference, move back to the United States, right? As we zoom around the Earth, right? And there is the United States. So the Mediterranean, final area we need to talk about, Mediterranean and Black Seas. Where is the Mediterranean? Well, it's in Europe. That's not where it is. We're moving over there. Mediterranean. What do we remember about the Mediterranean? Well, we did talk about it. It was kind of the area that sea power grew up, right? Down here in Crete, the Phoenicians, they grew up down here. The Romans, they had the Mare Nostrum, our sea. Um, that was the area that they were talking about, right? It's a fairly long but very shallow area. It's landlocked. It's a sea. It's enclosed, right? It's not an ocean, which is all open. Um, Average depth is only about 4,921 feet. Not much deeper than the Gulf of Mexico, but very, very shallow, very long. But it still is about 1.1 million square miles. All right. It's actually broken up into two areas, separated by the Straits of Sicily. If I can pull that up here. Right, there's the Straits of Sicily because there is Sicily, right? We call it the Western Basin and the Eastern Basin. Remember, we talked about basins kind of shaped like a bowl. Um, but you can see a lot of this area extends into a continental shelf. It is one of the most active volcano areas in the whole world. You can see as I zoom into Sicily, right? There's a lot of little islands, a lot of little rocky areas here. Um, we zoom in pretty close to some of these islands. You can see Isola Volcano, right? You zoom in, you can actually see the large craters, and those are still active volcanoes. People actually go to some of these areas to swim in the sulfur fields. They say it's good for you. I've been there. It smells like rotten eggs, but they are just kind of the tops of volcanoes. Ila Stromboli over here. You can actually see some of the stuff pouring out of it. It's actually home to one of the most active volcanoes in the world on Sicily, right here on Mount Etna. Mount Etna is kind of famous in Greek mythology, being the Cyclops, the one-eyed giant. Kind of zoom around here, but that's Mount Etna. Um, So very, very active volcanoes. They're kind of spewing up lava and building a lot of these little islands. Um, the Black Sea. It's going to be up here. That area might have been important as we discussed some of the things from history, right? We'll talk about this area down here in just a little while, but Black Sea, home also Russia's over here. They've got a lot of their submarine forces that can come down and go through, as we talked about the choke points down there. Um, Crimea, you may have heard about in the news lately. This area down here, recently annexed by Russia. It used to be part of Ukraine, which used to be part of the Soviet Union, so they're kind of getting it back. Um, but very, very important naval base there to house their submarine fleet. So the Black Sea and the Mediterranean have been in our history for a very long time. Well, why is that? Well, there's not a whole lot of mineral deposits, no like oil or anything else like that. But the Mediterranean basin has a fishing industry twice as valuable as that of any ocean. So lots of fish here thriving because it's kind of good water, but lots of different types of fish. and it's easy to get to. Lots of areas that you can get out of, fish, and get back to fairly easy. So the U.S. has had a very big interest in this area since World War II. Kept a pretty good presence, but also NATO is a conglomeration of all Europe and lots of different areas, right? Well, one of the NATO southern headquarters is here in Naples, Italy. Kind of easy, kind of a center point for everything to get to. But the U.S. military has some areas there in Capodichino around Naples, two different bases there. But then we've also got a big base down here in Sigonella, Sicily. I was stationed there for 3 years. Great area. So large naval base. I actually share it with the Italians. It's their base that we actually just kind of borrow. But very important because it's kind of at the center of the Mediterranean, an important logistics hub. So we can get stuff over here to go to Spain or over here to Greece fairly easy. So kind of a central point in all of the Mediterranean. We talked about Straits of Gibraltar over here, right? And some of the important choke points that were also inside the Mediterranean. So Sevastopol, as we talked about, that's one of the areas that they're in Crimea that the Russians have recently annexed. That is a big naval base. Well, they get all their submarines out through this Bosphorus Straits and the Dardanelles. Remember what the Dardanelles was important for in part of our history? It's been kind of a hotly contested area all through history, going all the way back to the Greeks with the Persians, the Spartans, the 300 Thermopylae, trying to hold off the Persian advance. All right. So everything coming out of the Black Sea has to go through these, once again, these choke points. Now, we talk about a lot of these choke points, the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, and also the last one I'm going to talk about down here is the Suez Canal, right? Now, under international treaties, all these choke points, they can be owned by a country, but they cannot control them, right? They have to allow free passage for commercial ships. Blocking off a strategic choke point could be considered an act of war. So, even though they kind of own them and they can kind of control them, and you may have to pay fees to get through, they cannot stop free passage. We'll talk more in Naval Science 3 about international law and maritime. It's not really all that enforced. But where does the U.S. Navy fit into that whole thing? So I've kind of given you an overview of all of the Western Seas. Fairly quick, but it's important to understand the geography as we start talking about some of these things about oceanography. It kind of gives you it ties in a lot of the stuff we're talking about in history also. So hopefully this has been good. We'll talk a little bit about the Eastern Seas in our next unit. But it's important to understand the geography before we start getting into, how does seawater affect it? How do currents affect it? Because if you look, the currents going through these big, vast oceans versus something like the Gulf of Mexico are going to be very different. It's going to be depending on that geography. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of overview. We'll get back here to the United States and complete our tour where we started. Thanks a lot for listening. If you have questions, just let me know in class. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.